"Give me your rifle," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos of gunfire. The Marines stared at the general's daughter, blonde, the one they mocked as princess, beautiful and never having seen combat. "Now," she commanded. 3 minutes later, she shocked everyone. The Marines froze. They had never seen anything like that before. She was no longer the princess. Welcome to Hidden Valor Stories. Before we continue this incredible story of courage, skill, and deadly beauty, tell me in the comments what city are you watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan's Khost province was not the kind of place where you expected to see someone like Lieutenant Sarah Wellington. At 24, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine rather than a military transport, blonde hair always perfectly styled despite the desert conditions, makeup that somehow remained flawless even in 20-degree heat, and a posture that suggested debutante balls rather than boot camp. She was General Marcus Wellington's daughter, and everyone knew it. The kind of detail that spread through a combat unit faster than rumors about going home. Some said she was there for a photo op, a carefully orchestrated PR stunt to show that even privileged military families were committed to the war effort. Others whispered that Daddy had pulled strings to get her an easy deployment, somewhere she could claim combat experience without actually facing real danger. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, who'd been fighting in Afghanistan for 3 tours, summed up the general sentiment during a late-night conversation in the enlisted quarters. "She's beautiful, I'll give her that, but this ain't a beauty contest. This is a war zone, and someone like her is gonna get people killed." The Marines of 2nd Platoon Bravo Company had been tasked with her protection and integration, military speak for babysitting the general's daughter while making sure she didn't accidentally wander into a firefight that would create an international incident. They treated her with the kind of careful politeness reserved for visiting dignitaries and live explosives. For 3 weeks, Sarah had endured their condescending courtesy with grace that only reinforced their assumptions about her character. She performed her assigned duties as a communications officer with competence that surprised no one. After all, she'd graduated from West Point, and even generals' daughters had to meet minimum standards. But when conversations turned to combat experiences, weapons, or the brutal realities of counterinsurgency warfare, she remained quietly in the background. "She's never fired a shot in anger," Corporal James Mitchell observed after a patrol briefing, where Sarah had taken notes but asked no tactical questions. "Probably never will." They called her princess when they thought she couldn't hear, though her acute hearing meant she caught every whispered comment, every rolled eye, every gesture of barely concealed frustration when her presence complicated their operations. She absorbed their skepticism without complaint, maintaining the kind of professional demeanor that her father had taught her was essential for military officers, especially female officers, especially generals' daughters, who had everything to prove and nothing to gain from confrontation. But Sarah Wellington was carrying secrets that would have changed everything about how 2nd Platoon viewed their assigned charge. Secrets that she'd been ordered to keep classified at levels far above the security clearances of the Marines who were protecting her. October 15th dawned clear and cold in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. 2nd Platoon had been assigned a routine patrol mission, reconnaissance of suspected Taliban supply routes through the Hindu Kush passes that connected Pakistan to the Khost province strongholds. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence, standard operating procedure for missions where the general's daughter would be accompanying the patrol. The patrol consisted of 12 Marines plus Sarah, moving in standard formation through terrain that offered excellent visibility and multiple escape routes. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had planned the mission personally, choosing routes that minimized risk while still accomplishing the reconnaissance objectives that would satisfy the brass back at headquarters. "Stay close to Martinez," Rodriguez instructed Sarah during the pre-mission briefing, referring to their most experienced communications specialist. "Your job is to maintain contact with base and document anything we find. Let us handle security." Sarah nodded with the same compliant professionalism she'd shown for 3 weeks. She carried standard communications equipment, a sidearm she'd never been seen firing, and a camera for intelligence documentation. To the Marines, she looked like exactly what they expected, a privileged observer playing at being a soldier. The patrol moved out at 06:30, following established routes through valleys that had been cleared multiple times by previous operations. For 4 hours, everything proceeded exactly according to plan. They covered 8 kilometers of mountainous terrain, documented 3 abandoned campsites that showed recent use, and maintained regular radio contact with base operations. At 10:47 hours, everything changed. The ambush was textbook perfect, executed with the kind of tactical sophistication that Taliban forces had developed through years of fighting American units. 12 insurgent fighters had positioned themselves in elevated rocky positions overlooking the valley floor, creating interlocking fields of fire that turned the patrol route into a killing zone with no effective cover. The first shots came simultaneously from 3 different directions, immediately wounding 2 Marines and forcing the rest to take whatever minimal cover they could find behind scattered boulders and depression in the rocky terrain. Within 30 seconds it became clear that 2nd Platoon was trapped in a carefully prepared ambush with limited ammunition, no immediate air support, and enemy forces that had every tactical advantage. "Base. This is Falcon 2-7. Rodriguez shouted into his radio while bullets shattered rocks inches from his head. "Taking effective fire from multiple positions, we need immediate close air support and medevac." The response crackled back through static and gunfire. "Falcon 2-7, Kias is 30 minutes out, medevac is 45. Hold your position and mark targets for air support." 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. The Taliban fighters were systematically working their way closer, using covering fire to bound from position to position, while the Marines burned through their ammunition trying to suppress an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. Corporal Mitchell, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, managed to low crawl to Rodriguez's position. "Sergeant, we can't hold this position much longer. They've got us zeroed from 3 sides." Rodriguez understood their tactical situation with the clarity that came from 3 tours of combat experience. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and rapidly running out of options. In 30 minutes, when air support arrived, they'd find bodies, not survivors. That's when Sarah Wellington spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos with startling calm. "Give me your rifle." Rodriguez stared at the general's daughter, certain he'd misheard over the sound of incoming fire. Sarah was crouched behind the same inadequate boulder that provided their only cover, but instead of the fear he expected to see in someone experiencing their first combat, her expression showed something else entirely. Focus. The kind of predatory concentration that Rodriguez had seen in Marine snipers who'd spent years perfecting their craft. "What did you say?" he shouted back. "Your rifle," Sarah repeated, her voice steady despite bullets snapping overhead. "I need your M4 and I need to know if anyone has precision optics." "Ma'am, you need to stay down and—" "Sergeant Rodriguez," Sarah interrupted, and suddenly her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there for 3 weeks of careful deference. "I'm ordering you to give me your rifle. Now." Something in her tone made Rodriguez hesitate. This wasn't the privileged princess who'd been documenting their patrol for Daddy's war stories. This was someone else entirely. Someone who understood exactly what their tactical situation required. "Martinez has an ACOG scope," Rodriguez said, still not understanding what was happening but recognizing command voice when he heard it. "Get it." Sarah was already checking Rodriguez's weapon, performing functions checks with the kind of automatic precision that came from extensive training. "And I need someone to spot distances." Corporal Mitchell, who'd been watching this exchange with growing amazement, managed to speak through his confusion. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" Sarah looked at him directly, and Mitchell saw something in her eyes that made him understand, with sudden shocking clarity, that everything they'd assumed about the general's daughter had been completely wrong. "My job," she said simply. Martinez low-crawled over with his rifle, the ACOG scope providing 4x magnification that would be adequate for the ranges they were dealing with. Sarah accepted the weapon, checked the scope alignment and chambered around with movements that were faster and more confident than most of the Marines had ever achieved. "Princess?" Mitchell whispered, using the nickname they'd all adopted without thinking. Sarah glanced at him with what might have been a smile. "Call me Angel." What happened over the next 3 minutes would be discussed in classified briefings for months afterward, studied by tactical analysts who couldn't quite believe the after-action reports, and whispered about in combat units across Afghanistan. Sarah Wellington, the general's daughter, the princess, the privileged observer, transformed into something that none of the Marines had ever witnessed before. Moving with fluid efficiency, she identified the enemy positions that had been suppressing their patrol, calculated ranges and wind conditions, and began systematically eliminating Taliban fighters with precision that defied belief. Her first shot dropped the enemy machine gunner who'd been preventing them from maneuvering to better cover. 800 meters, single round, center mass hit that silenced the weapon instantly. "Holy shit," Rodriguez breathed. watching through binoculars as the Taliban position went silent. Sarah was already transitioning to her second target, a sniper who'd been firing from an elevated rocky position that provided excellent cover and concealment. 750 meters, difficult angle, target partially obscured by terrain features, single shot. The enemy sniper's rifle clattered down the rocks. "Ma'am," Martinez whispered, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah didn't answer. She was acquiring her third target, another machine gun position that had been pouring fire into their location. This shot was more complex. The enemy fighter was using a large boulder for cover, exposing only small portions of his body as he fired, then ducking back behind protection. Sarah waited, 40 seconds of absolute stillness, rifle steady, breathing controlled. When the Taliban fighter exposed himself for another burst of fire, she was ready. 900 meters, moving target, partial concealment, single shot. The enemy position went silent. By now, the surviving Taliban fighters had realized that something had changed in the tactical equation. Their carefully planned ambush was being systematically destroyed by precision fire from someone they couldn't see, someone who was hitting targets at ranges and under conditions that shouldn't have been possible with standard military equipment. They began withdrawing, bounding from position to position, while trying to maintain suppressive fire. But Sarah had identified their movement patterns, predicted their likely routes, and was already positioning for shots that would intercept them during their withdrawal. Fourth target, Taliban fighter, moving between rocky positions, thinking he was concealed from observation. Sarah led his movement by exactly the right amount, accounting for his speed and direction. Single shot at nearly 1,000 meters dropped him mid-stride. Fifth target, enemy fighter trying to establish a new firing position from which to continue the engagement. Sarah's bullet found him before he could bring his weapon to bear. Sixth target, seventh, eighth. The Marines watched in stunned silence as the general's daughter systematically eliminated every enemy fighter who had moments before been destroying their patrol. Each shot was placed with surgical precision. Each target fell without opportunity to return fire. Each impossible hit reinforced the growing realization that they had been completely fundamentally wrong about who Sarah Wellington really was. The entire engagement lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. When it was over, 12 Taliban fighters lay dead in positions scattered across nearly a square kilometer of mountainous terrain, and second platoon was no longer taking fire. The silence that followed the engagement was broken only by the sound of wind through the mountain passes and the distant noise of helicopters approaching from the south. The close air support that would no longer be needed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to speak, his voice barely audible. "Ma'am, what the hell just happened?" Sarah was already clearing her rifle, performing post-engagement procedures with the same methodical precision she'd shown during the firefight. When she looked up, the Marines saw something in her expression that explained everything and nothing simultaneously. "I did what I was trained to do," she said simply. "Trained by who?" Martinez asked, still staring at the distant positions where enemy fighters had been eliminated by shots that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah paused in her equipment check, considering how much classified information she could share with Marines who didn't have appropriate security clearances. Finally, she decided that the circumstances justified partial disclosure. U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, Special Operations Command, Advanced Urban Sniper School, Marine Scout Sniper School. She listed the training programs with casual precision, as if she were reciting items from a grocery list rather than the most elite marksmanship training available to American military personnel. "You're a sniper," Mitchell said, the statement carrying the weight of everything they were beginning to understand. "I'm a lot of things," Sarah replied, "but yes, marksmanship is one of my specializations." Rodriguez was trying to process information that contradicted everything he'd assumed about their assigned charge for the past 3 weeks. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you tell us?" Sarah met his gaze directly, and Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that reminded him of other special operations personnel he'd encountered, a depth of experience and capability that couldn't be faked or taught through routine training. "Because my mission parameters didn't require disclosure of my full capabilities," she said, "and because sometimes it's useful when people underestimate what you can do." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as close air support arrived to find an engagement that was already over. Sarah stood, shouldering Martinez's rifle, and keyed her radio to contact the incoming aircraft. "Viper 2-1, this is Falcon 2-7 actual. Threat neutralized, no KS required. Request immediate medevac for 2 wounded Marines. Her use of 2-7 actual caused Rodriguez to stare at her with growing comprehension. In military radio protocol, actual designated the unit commander, not an observer or communications specialist. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you saying you're actually in command of this patrol?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic, carrying implications that would require security briefings far above Rodriguez's clearance level to fully explain. "Let's just say that protecting the general's daughter was never really your mission, Sergeant Rodriguez. You were providing cover for mine." As medical helicopters evacuated the wounded Marines and close air support circled overhead in unnecessary protective patterns, Sarah finally explained what 2nd Platoon had actually been accomplishing for the past 3 weeks. The routine patrols, the seemingly random reconnaissance missions, the carefully planned routes through supposedly low-threat areas, all of it had been designed to establish patterns that would eventually draw specific high-value targets into predetermined locations where they could be eliminated with minimal collateral damage and maximum deniability. "The 12 fighters we just engaged weren't random Taliban," Sarah explained during the helicopter ride back to base. "They were a specialized cell responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition supply convoys throughout this region. Intelligence had been trying to locate them for 8 months. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the scope of the deception that had been orchestrated around their routine mission. "And you knew they'd be there?" "I knew they'd eventually be somewhere along our patrol routes," Sarah corrected. "Today just happened to be the day when our patterns coincided with their operational schedule." "So we were bait," Martinez said, the realization carrying both anger and grudging admiration for the sophistication of the operation. "You were Marines doing your job," Sarah replied firmly. "The fact that your professionalism and competence provided perfect cover for a specialized mission doesn't diminish what you accomplished today." Mitchell, his shrapnel wounds treated by the helicopter medic, asked the question that was bothering all of them. "Ma'am, how long have you been doing this kind of work?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the Afghan landscape scroll past beneath them. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of experiences that went far beyond today's engagement. "Long enough to understand that some missions require people to believe you're someone you're not. Long enough to know that underestimation can be the most valuable weapon in your arsenal." "And your father?" Rodriguez asked. "Does General Wellington know about your specialized capabilities?" Sarah's laugh was genuine, carrying amusement that the Marines found both reassuring and slightly disturbing. "Where do you think I learned them?" Back at Forward Operating Base Chapman, word of the engagement spread through the command structure with the speed of all significant military events. The official after-action report would describe a successful reconnaissance patrol that had encountered and eliminated a high-value Taliban cell through superior tactics and marksmanship. The classified annex to that report would detail the specialized mission parameters that had actually driven the operation, the extensive planning that had gone into creating conditions for the engagement, and the specific capabilities of the personnel who had made the mission successful. But among the Marines of 2nd Platoon, the story became something else entirely, a lesson in assumption, capability, and the dangerous habit of judging people by their appearance rather than their actions. "You know what bothers me most?" Rodriguez said during the informal debrief that took place in the enlisted quarters that evening. "For 3 weeks we thought we were protecting her. Turns out she was protecting us." Martinez nodded, still processing the day's revelations. "All those times we worried about her getting us killed in a firefight, she probably could have handled anything we ran into better than we could." "She did handle it better than we could," Mitchell pointed out, his bandaged arm a reminder of how quickly their situation had deteriorated before Sarah's intervention. The psychological impact of discovering that their assumptions had been so completely wrong extended beyond simple embarrassment. These were experienced combat Marines who prided themselves on their ability to assess situations and personnel accurately. The realization that they'd been so thoroughly deceived by someone they'd spent weeks observing forced them to reconsider other assumptions they'd made about people and situations. "Makes you wonder," Rodriguez mused, "how many other people we've met who weren't what they seemed." "Makes me wonder how many times we've been wrong without finding out," Martinez added. But perhaps the most significant impact was the grudging respect that replaced their earlier condescension. Sarah Wellington had earned their recognition not through her father's rank or her own military credentials, but through demonstrated capability under conditions where competence meant survival and failure meant death. Within days, the story of the general's daughter and her impossible marksmanship began spreading through the military networks that connected forward operating bases across Afghanistan. Details were embellished with each retelling, turning 3 minutes of precision shooting into an epic engagement that grew larger with each recounting. Some versions claimed she'd eliminated 20 enemy fighters. Others insisted the engagement had lasted 30 minutes. A few suggested she'd made shots at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters with equipment that shouldn't have been capable of such accuracy. But among those who had been there, who had witnessed the actual engagement, the story remained simpler and somehow more impressive for its restraint. Sarah Wellington, Princess General's daughter, privileged observer, had saved their lives with skills that none of them had suspected she possessed. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Mitchell said during one of their conversations about the engagement. "Those shots weren't just accurate, they were surgical. Every target eliminated with minimal ammunition, no wasted rounds, no collateral damage." Professional, Martinez agreed, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Rodriguez nodded, understanding what they were describing. That wasn't someone who happened to be a good shot. That was someone who'd been trained specifically for that kind of engagement under those exact conditions. The implications were sobering. Sarah's capabilities suggested training and experience that went far beyond routine military marksmanship instruction. The precision, the tactical awareness, the calm efficiency, these were characteristics of elite special operations personnel, not communications officers assigned to routine reconnaissance patrols. How many other missions has she been on? Mitchell wondered. How many other times has someone like us thought they were protecting her when she was actually protecting them? It was a question that would never be answered officially, but the speculation became part of the legend that grew around Sarah Wellington. In barracks conversations and classified briefings, she became a symbol of hidden capability, of the danger of assumptions, and of the reality that in modern warfare, the most dangerous people were often those who looked least dangerous. 3 weeks later, Sarah Wellington rotated back to the United States, her deployment officially complete. Her departure was noted in routine personnel reports, her contributions documented in classified files that would never be publicly acknowledged. But her impact on 2nd Platoon extended far beyond operational success or tactical innovation. She had taught them something that would influence how they approached every subsequent mission, every new team member, every situation where appearances might mask reality. Before Afghanistan, Rodriguez would tell new Marines joining his unit, "I thought I was pretty good at reading people, thought I could tell who had what it takes and who didn't. Then I spent 3 weeks protecting someone I thought was weak, only to discover she was stronger than all of us combined." The lesson became part of the informal education that experienced combat veterans passed to newer personnel, a reminder that in military operations as in life, the most dangerous assumptions were often the ones that seemed most obvious. Martinez developed his own version of the story, emphasizing the technical aspects of Sarah's marksmanship. 12 targets, 12 rounds, 3 minutes. No follow-up shots, no misses, no hesitation. That's not luck. That's not natural talent. That's training and experience at levels most of us will never see. Mitchell focused on the tactical implications. She knew exactly what the situation required and exactly how to provide it. While we were trying to figure out how to survive, she was already implementing the solution. But perhaps the most significant lesson was the one that none of them discussed directly, the realization that their own prejudices and assumptions had nearly prevented them from recognizing exceptional capability in someone whose appearance didn't match their expectations of what a warrior should look like. Sarah Wellington returned to her official duties within the Special Operations community, her Afghanistan deployment adding another classified entry to a service record that would never be fully disclosed. But the story of what happened in the Hindu Kush mountains continued to influence military personnel long after the participants had moved on to other assignments. The engagement became a case study in specialized training programs, an example of how effective cover and deception could be maintained even among friendly forces. It was analyzed in advanced tactical courses as a demonstration of precision marksmanship under extreme conditions. Most importantly, it became a reminder that capability and appearance were not always correlated in ways that seemed obvious. For the Marines of 2nd Platoon, the experience became a defining moment that influenced how they approached their remaining deployment and subsequent military careers. They had learned in the most dramatic way possible that their preconceptions could be both wrong and dangerous. "Sometimes I wonder," Rodriguez reflected months later, "what would have happened if we'd known from the beginning who she really was. Would we have treated her differently? Would the mission have been as successful? It was a question that highlighted the complexity of military operations where multiple objectives had to be accomplished simultaneously, often by personnel who weren't fully briefed on all aspects of their mission. Martinez had his own perspective. Maybe the point was that we weren't supposed to know. Maybe she needed us to treat her like she was just the general's daughter so she could do whatever her real job was. Mitchell nodded, understanding the implications. We were part of her cover story whether we knew it or not. The realization that they had been unwitting participants in a deception operation was initially disturbing, but ultimately became a source of professional pride. Their authentic reactions to Sarah's presence had provided perfect camouflage for her actual mission, and their professional competence had created conditions that allowed her specialized skills to be employed effectively. Years later, when Rodriguez had been promoted to gunnery sergeant and was training new Marine reconnaissance teams, he would tell the story of the general's daughter as a lesson in assumption, capability, and the importance of never underestimating anyone based on their appearance. She looked like a princess, he would say, and we treated her like one. Turned out she was an angel of death who could place bullets where they needed to be with surgical precision. The lesson isn't about her capabilities, it's about our assumptions. Martinez, who eventually became a sniper instructor himself, used Sarah's engagement as an example of perfect marksmanship under pressure. 12 targets, 12 rounds, combat conditions, multiple angles, extended ranges. I've seen Olympic shooters who couldn't duplicate that performance on a calm day at a controlled range. Mitchell incorporated the story into leadership training, emphasizing the importance of understanding that team members might possess capabilities that weren't immediately apparent. The most valuable people in your unit might be the ones you least expect. Your job as a leader is to create conditions where everyone's abilities can contribute to mission success. But perhaps the most lasting impact was the respect that remained among the Marines who had served with Sarah Wellington. They had witnessed something extraordinary, not just exceptional marksmanship, but the revelation that extraordinary capabilities could be hidden behind ordinary appearances, that angels could look like princesses, and that sometimes the people you thought you were protecting were actually protecting you. The classified files that documented Sarah Wellington's military service would reveal a career that spanned multiple special operations communities, advanced training programs, and missions that required capabilities far beyond routine military specialties. Her deployment with 2nd Platoon represented just one assignment in a service record that included training with the world's most elite military units and operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. But for the Marines who had seen her transformation from princess to angel of death, the technical details of her background mattered less than the demonstration of what was possible when appearance and capability aligned in unexpected ways. She had taught them that in warfare as in life, the most dangerous opponents were often those who looked least dangerous. She had shown them that capability could be disguised, that training could be concealed, and that sometimes the greatest tactical advantage came from being underestimated by everyone, including your own team. Most importantly, she had proven that when everything went wrong, when careful plans collapsed into chaos, when survival depended on individual skill and courage, the people who mattered most were those who could deliver exactly what the situation required, regardless of what anyone had expected from them. Sarah Wellington, General's daughter, princess, communications officer, angel of death, had become a legend not because of her family connections or her military rank, but because when her fellow Marines needed a miracle, she had provided 12 of them in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. And sometimes that's exactly what angels do. So I ask you, have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their appearance? Someone who surprised you with capabilities you never suspected? Share their story in the comments. Let's celebrate the hidden angels among us. Thanks for watching Hidden Valor Stories. If this moved you, subscribe and share. These stories need to be told. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who look most innocent.